All right. Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I am so excited to have everybody here today to talk about strategic planning. I am Tracy Story. And I can't get my slides to go. Give me a minute, guys. There we go. I'm Tracy Story. I'm the Associate Vice President for Nonprofit Enterprise Strategic Planning at BWF. At BWF, our collaborative team leverages a really robust knowledge base, proven methodology, and decades of industry experience to deliver exceptional results and experiences for our clients. What that means for me is that I get to work with my clients all day, every day, and talk to them about their strategic planning work and process and how to make this whole activity really work to the best advantage of their organizations. I'm so excited to see all of you in the chat, and I am excited for this conversation today. I want to encourage you throughout the conversation to go ahead and put any questions you have into the Q&A. I might not be able to see them until the end, but we are going to hold time at the end for questions. So please go ahead and put them in there. With that, I'm going to start and hope to hear from you all throughout the presentation. I thought today that what we would do is we would start first by having me talk a little bit about why I think strategic planning is so important and why the plans matter to organizations. I know that strategic planning in many ways can be a bit of a Rorschach. And sometimes people mean different things or think of different things when they think of strategic planning. So I wanted to start there first. But then I wanted to talk about a couple of different things and places where I think if you make some changes to how you engage in your process, how you frame it for yourself, and a couple of the key roles that you establish as part of the process, if you make a few tweaks in those spaces, I think that you can realize really significant improvements and changes for your own organization. And so I wanted to share a few of those with you all today. So with that, I'm going to start by talking about strategic planning in general. As you all can see at the top here, these are sort of the classic elements of a strategic plan. There's the mission that really represents the core of who you are, ideally, that it is the expression of your fundamental commitment as an organization and to your community or your stakeholders. The mission statement is something that I think often doesn't change. It shouldn't probably change every 3 or 5 years, but it is fundamentally what your organization is about. And the vision statement, on the other hand, I think of as a part of the strategic plan that is very specific for the duration of the plan. It is the expression of sort of how you want to live out that mission statement for a defined period of time. It's often an expression of how you want to make a transformation to your organization, or really level up their activities in a particular way. And then the goals, the objectives, and the tactics are really the how. How are you going to live out that vision statement and that mission statement in the course of this strategic plan? The goals really often, I think, should sit at the enterprise level and be applicable across the entirety of your organization. Objectives get a little bit more narrow, tactics narrower still, often down to your smaller teams or even your individual contributors. And then I think every strategic plan ideally has this evaluation moment, not only where you have KPIs for your sort of objectives or your tactics, but also an evaluation moment for the overall plan itself, how well it is working in your organization, how responsive it still is to your environment, and giving you an opportunity to make any tweaks or changes at that sort of objective and tactics level as you go forward. With that kind of a strategic plan, I think you have your best bet at sort of organizational alignment and really a cohesive organization where you are all working together toward the same end goal. Hopefully what that means, in my experience, is that the strategic plan sort of sits at the highest level and is the expression of that sort of future state, your fundamental commitments, how you want to live it out for a period of time, and what you're going to really throw your energy and your weight and your resources behind. That then you have sort of your annual, semi-annual, whatever way you tend to do it in your organization, your sort of operational or annual planning process that is directly informed by the strategic plan, but is for a more limited and specific period of time. And then you have sort of your business unit, your team, and eventually sort of your individuals, which are aligned to that decision-making framework and ultimately the strategic plan. I think that gives you in many ways your best bet at organizational alignment, which is why I think it's so important. to have a great strategic plan. I think ultimately one of the things that's really important here is that your smaller teams and your individual contributors be able to really see that through line between what they are doing on a Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. when they have an hour to breathe and they decide what they're going to focus on, all the way through up to the strategic plan and ultimately to the mission of your organization, so that they are both motivated by and understand where they should put their attention and their focus and their resources on those occasions. I think without that, you have smaller teams, you have individuals who are making their own choices about what to do in those moments. And it can really lead to a diminution of the impact of your resources and limit the capacity of your organization to really support significant change and make sort of those big leaps forward. So that's sort of my summary about why I think strategic planning is so important and why this can be a really important moment for your organization. But let me talk a little bit about sort of some of those suggestions I have. Before I get into it, though, I would love to hear from you all about your own experiences in strategic planning and where your organization is. We have a couple of questions we're going to offer to y'all. They're thrown up on the screen here. You can see one that is really about how effective you find your organization's plan. And the other is really about what stage you are in the process. I'm going to take a minute to breathe and get a drink and let y'all answer these questions, and then we'll keep going. We have about half of y'all have completed the plan. So we're going to leave it up for, I think, just another like 30 seconds, and then we'll take it down and see the results. It looks like a lot of you are pretty early in your strategic plan that you think looks like most people are landing where you think it's effective, but you'd like to see some room for improvement. I think that's great. Hopefully some of my tips here today will give you that. Don't forget, if you haven't answered it yet, that there is a second poll. It looks like a few of you are now moving to answer it. That's great. Go ahead and scroll down if you don't see it already on your box. All right. I think in the interest of moving forward, it looks like most of you have answered the first poll. Maybe only a few of you have answered the second. But I think in the interest of keeping us moving, we're going to take the poll down and go ahead. And if you didn't get a chance to answer both polls, you can certainly put your answers in the chat. And we will talk about that. Okay, let me stop sharing for a minute. So hopefully, let me share the results quickly. Great, thank you. I know not everybody could get to the second one. It looks like there wasn't a prompt, so I apologize for that. For those of you who didn't get it, you'll be able to see it hopefully in the results, and you can pop your answer in the chat. But I think that what we're seeing here is that there's a whole range of experiences in terms of strategic planning and how effective you think it is. You know, the majority of you overall look like you're looking for a little bit more from your strategic planning than what you're getting. So, okay, let me stop sharing this and then we will keep going. So let's talk a little bit about some of the areas where I think you can make some small changes and make a big difference in your experience with strategic planning. So what I find is that many of my clients that I work with really talk about strategic planning and look to it to help them enable really significant change for their organization. It's in many ways one of the moments where organizations really take a moment, take a beat, and consider how they'd like to see really significant transformation in their organization. And I think that is not easy to do. It's a hard process. It's a thoughtful process. One of the places where people really struggle with this is figuring out how to sort of bring their stakeholders alongside of them in that change and encourage them to really embrace it. And I think there are some things you can do to make a difference here. Think about how you get your stakeholders on board, how you bring about a change in your culture, and what sort of, how do you identify the road that you should follow in order to do that? I think in many ways, the more inclusive you make the process, the more you involve folks across your stakeholder segments in the organization, the better off your planning will be. I think what this means, it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be really hard. I think you can talk about your strategic planning work often. Talk about it before you launch it, but you're going to launch it. Talk about it when you have, throughout the process, and of course, when you socialize the plan. I think if you feel like you're talking about it a little bit too much, you're probably talking about it about as much as you should be with the folks across your stakeholder groups. I think you can use a lot of the channels you already have in place and that are working well for your organization. You don't need to set up a whole new set of sort of communications channels and tools. And I think what's really important is that you find ways to involve people authentically and meaningfully into the process to show them that you really value what they bring to the table. In many ways, with my clients, what we use most often is surveys, staff, board retreats. Some of my clients have used sort of virtual suggestion boxes. They use their sort of intranet sites to communicate about it, or their newsletters. And one of the things that I talk to folks about is really important is be sure to tell people how their participation made an impact on the process and to invite them into the process. I've had clients where we have released surveys to, thousands of people. I've had clients where we have invited 60, 70 people across, sort of a mid-sized organization to participate in focus groups. We've never had all of the folks that we send the survey to complete it. We've never had all those 60 or 70 people even participate in the focus groups. At the end of the day, you can't control whether or not people participate, but you can control whether or not you invite them to do it. And I think the invitation matters for their engagement. For those who do engage, I think it's really important that you talk to them about how their participation really made a difference. I think this is a place where you can begin to shift your stakeholders and see themselves as being ambassadors and being agents in this process. And it will help them embrace the change ultimately, even though some of it might be somewhat challenging for them. So that's important. I think one of the other things that I come across a lot with my clients, and I wanted to just share, is that, when I first start talking to clients, some of them talk about, that they love strategic planning because they really like thinking big. They like having those sort of big idea conversations. They like blue skying. They like, what if we were to imagine ourselves sort of, in a completely different environment in the future, and how might our organization look? They're very comfortable in that sort of big idea space. I have other clients who come to me and they say to me, Tracy, it's not what I do well. I don't enjoy it. I'm not persuaded it's useful. What I really want to talk about are we have gaps here. We have challenges in our resources here. We have difficulties in our staff in these places. And I want to talk about how we're going to address those particular pieces and be very practical, very tactical in terms of how we think about the strategic planning process, because I don't really enjoy the big dream part, or I don't see that it's important or relevant. Oftentimes my clients come to me and they regard themselves as needing to lean into one kind of a strategic plan or another kind of plan. And what I often try to say to them is that ultimately the best strategic plans create a bridge between those two spaces. It is a very narrow path often for organizations, but I think the path is important to identify and to walk it. The strategic plan should, if it leans in only into practical considerations or only into sort of big aspirations, I think you've missed your opportunity and you're unlikely to create a strategic plan that is going to be meaningful and practical to your organization and also leverage you forward. And so I think sort of, working in those two spaces is the best way to make sure that the plan you've put together is actually a strategic plan and will make a difference to your organization. When I think about how do you know if the plan that you've put together is walking that path and is in fact actually strategic, I think about a couple of different things. I think you really need to think about, have you balanced appropriately? Are you walking that line between taking some risks and really leaning on your insights into the organization in order to help you grow? What I find with most of my clients is a really great strategic plan is one where everybody ends up just a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit nervous about what they put together, but also excited about it. It's one where they're confident they've made their best educated bet about the future and how they want the organization to exist in that future. They've accepted that there's some uncertainty, but they're excited about going forward. Really good strategic plans, I think, also ultimately become strategic when you've spent time thinking and talking about what you're going to stop doing as much as you have what you're going to start doing. I think if you haven't sort of experienced some of these things or engaged in some of these activities, you might be in a place where you would benefit from a little bit more consideration and internal conversation as you craft your plan. I want to talk a little bit about what I think, you shouldn't do as you think about crafting a strategic plan and making sure that it's going to be effective for your organization. I think when you make a plan, you need to make sure that that strategic plan doesn't end up being just an inventory of your current work. I think it's important that you do an inventory of your current work, but that's not the plan itself. If it does exist in that space, I'd say you've sort of not walked that balance between sort of being aspirational and being practical. I think some organizations write these strategic plans and they don't often have a practical means or a formal process for incorporating the strategic plan into their annual planning process. I think that's always a struggle because it means that you're not really leveraging the benefit of the work that you've done to craft the plan in your annual operating activities. I think sometimes too, strategic plans struggle when you define success only by the ultimate end goal, and your metrics are all centered on that ultimate end goal, and you haven't identified sort of the incremental milestones and the success markers that you need to know when you've achieved them. It's important, I think, to keep people going, and it's important, I think, to celebrate those wins and to make sure that you know that you're on the path sort of as you're moving along. I think sometimes it's also a mistake to assume that the plan sort of can just come out of your actual ongoing activities of your leadership team or your organizational team. The plan really probably does require some very careful consideration for who's going to facilitate it and who's going to manage the plan going forward. I think that those things make a real difference in terms of the impact of the plan. And that's what I want to focus on next, are sort of those two roles and how important I think they are to the organization. Hang on, I'm having a little bit of trouble doing my slides. Here we go. So I want to talk about the role of the facilitator. This is the role that I think plays a really significant role while you're in the process of crafting the plan. To be frank, it's often the role that I play with my clients in our engagements. I think, whoever does it is important that the facilitator bring a couple of things to the table. Functionally, the facilitator is the guide to the process. I think the facilitator really cannot also be a contributor. So they can't be one of the folks that manages one of your major business units and facilitate the conversation while also speaking to their business units, contributions, needs, and sort of role to play in the process. So it needs to be somebody who can sit with that sort of planning team, but not be representing a unit within it. It's important that they be able to do that so that they can sort of meet some of these other conditions. They really need to be focused on ensuring that all the voices are heard and reflected in the considerations. They ultimately need to keep you on track and on schedule. I have unfortunately heard from some folks who are I heard from one person who said they were 3 years into the process of crafting a strategic plan, and they had not been able to sort of keep their decision stable, keep it on track, move it forward, get the meeting scheduled, get people to be attentive to it. It was really, it made me sad, and it was unfortunate. And I think a good facilitator can hold you accountable and keep you on track and craft that schedule for you and make sure that you complete it in a timely fashion and therefore can benefit from it in your organization. I think the other thing a facilitator can do, and that I've seen is really important, is that when the leadership in your organization takes on the role of facilitator, that you end up in places where folks are reluctant to be fully transparent in their feedback and their participation in the process. I think that I've certainly, in my role as facilitator with some of my clients, I have heard from folks who are the closest to the organization, that they had feedback that they want to provide to me, that they did not feel comfortable sharing with the leadership of the nonprofit or the leadership of the board, for example. And it's not that they're being overly critical, but that they have a hard thing they want to share, and it is helpful to them to have a neutral person to share it with, who they know will reflect it back to them in a way that is can have it be heard without it being taken the wrong way. And so I think it really helps with that, not to have somebody in a leadership role as a facilitator, in my experience. It's really important that the facilitator be seen and actually function in an objective fashion, not be an advocate for any one or the other position, and therefore manage the conversation without steering it. I think if you can get somebody in that facilitator role who can sort of meet these conditions, you will be well on the way to ensuring that the process of crafting the plan is more successful and more efficient. Once you have the plan, I think it's really important that organizations identify a strategic plan manager, an individual. In very complex organizations, it might even be a team of folks who are responsible for overseeing and implementing that plan, and who are responsible for ensuring the success of the plan. That means that they are accountable for maintaining alignment and getting the plan in the position that it needs to be in to serve the organization well, aligned with their annual operating plans, relevant to their success metrics that they're generating. They need to monitor the progress. They need to establish milestones and make sure that the organization is hitting them. They need to keep communicating and motivating the stakeholders. Of course, that work of communicating with folks doesn't end once the plan is stood up. It needs to keep going. And I think that's what these individuals do well and really importantly. They need to review the resources and make sure that you are actually allocating your resources in a way that you agreed to when you crafted the plan, and that's aligned with the priorities that you've established. And ultimately, they're responsible for evaluating and sharing the progress of the plan up through the organization, and many times out through your stakeholders and your staff and others. I think it's a really important role, and it's one that I often find folks don't have in their plans when they first start to think about a strategic planning engagement. So I think that I hope that for you, these three things work as giving you some insight into how you can have a successful planning process, and make sure to use that process in a way that sets you up for success as you launch the plan and then maintain it going forward through a plan manager. With that, I have talked, I think, more than long enough, and I am going to take some of your questions. I can see there's a lot in the chat, and so I may not get to all of them, but let me make sure that I get to as many as I can. So I have a question here about what do I think about a 3 or a 5 year strategic plan? You know, I've worked with clients and done both 3-year and 5-year strategic plans. I think that it depends a little bit on what you're trying to accomplish in your plan and where your organization is. Those clients with whom I've done 3-year plans are in many ways working to, what I find is often that they are working to make organizational changes to themselves internally. So they want to set a sort of shorter time horizon, make those internal changes, and then stand up a new process for thinking about how they're going to sort of leverage those organizational changes to make an impact more broadly across the organization. My preference and my default is often for a 5-year plan. I think that it provides a good time horizon for the organization to get where it needs to go. It's not too long, it's not too short. It's sort of that little bit of a Goldilocks time frame. And so it tends to be my default, but I have absolutely done both. I haven't done anything significantly longer than 5 years, and I don't think I would, without a good compelling reason, be an advocate for it. Let me just see, we have a couple of questions here about covering the strategic plan initiatives. I'm not sure what you'd like me to speak to specifically about it. So if you want to put some more in the chat, please, or in the chat, please feel free. But what I would say in general is that I think that with my clients, we start with those larger level goals. We then go down into sort of, often for the more complex organizations, into objectives, strategies, and tactics. It's really important, I think, that you think through it as concretely and practically as you can, but that you're thoughtful about where each sits within the organization so that you can make sure that they are effective. So for example, you can end up with a strategic goal that is, say, we want to be an organization in which data informs our broad organizational choices, become a data first organization potentially. You know, that might mean that you need to have a goal sort of that is quite broad in terms of maybe adopting a data governance framework or policy if you don't have one, which means you maybe do some data inventory work, which can lead you to sort of the tactics of the team. And it allows you to time stamp it out across the organization as you go. I hope that answers your question about strategic initiatives, but we'll see. Can I talk about funding or fundraising for the plan? Yeah, so I think that resource generation is often a topic that comes up in strategic planning. It is often one of the key levers that organizations look at as they think about their strategic planning work going forward. In my work with clients, it's not unusual for the work that I do on strategic planning to be paired with a fundraising assessment, an assessment of their organizational fundraising capacity and whether or not there are opportunities to level that up as well, and then leverage those resources to enable new or different activities across the organization. I think that that's a very effective way to do it, and I think it has really benefited some of my clients to do both at the same time. What I've also told clients, though, especially some of my clients in places where they're really in the early stages of developing their fundraising activity, they're just on the cusp of, say, adopting a professional fundraiser and really sort of growing that part of their organization out. But the strategic plan and writing a strategic plan thoughtfully and carefully that expresses your fundamental commitments of who you are, how you're going to sort of enable those commitments and express them in that vision statement for a defined period of time, and exactly what are the goals that you're going to lean into to get there, are one of the best tools that you can equip your fundraisers with, because they tell that impact story about your organization that can be so helpful to you as you go about building a fundraising program and identifying new donors and new donor segments. Looks like we have a conversation about involving the board of directors and reviewing and approving strategic plan. So I think that's really important. We could probably do a whole webinar on involving boards in strategic planning process. I often talk to boards in my engagement with clients about, in some ways, about what's the right role for a board to have, what's the right role for professional staff to have, what's the right role for me as a consultant to have in this process. I think that involving the boards is really important, but there are operational considerations and activities. There are sort of considerations that go deeper down in the sort of practical operation of the organization that I don't think it's always appropriate for board members to get into. I think it's really, really important that you engage the board, but you engage them in a way that is consistent with the right level for the board, which is the kind of activities that they do. I do think at the end of the day, the strategic plan for most organizations, it's appropriate for it to be approved by the board and blessed by them. And it's something that when I work with my clients, I work a lot with them, and I work a lot with the boards and in helping each other work together well and understand their roles. So the key drivers among all the stakeholders, staff or board, it's an interesting question. And I think it's almost a false dichotomy between the two. I think everybody does have a role to play, and I think they all need to be involved. It does depend a little bit in terms of what kind of strategic plan you're putting together and where your focus is. But I don't think it's really a question of, who's driving it, staff or board. I think everybody has a role to play. It needs to be articulated at the beginning and understood by everybody and bought into by everybody, and then you use that as your guide as you go forward to engage folks. I hope that's somewhat helpful. I also wanted to just ask, we have a question a little bit about sort of whether or not there are particular metrics or KPIs that I'd suggest that folks adopt for their strategic plannings as a general matter. I get asked this a lot by folks, and I just don't think that there are KPIs. I think KPIs need to be specific for each organization and to the goals and the vision statement that each organization has put together, rather than being more general across the whole, across the nonprofit sector. There are some areas and things that you look at that are consistent across it, but I think the KPIs themselves are distinct. So let me ask, I just found this other thing. So for an organization with a staff under 10, how many FTEs? Yeah, so for an organization under 10, should be managing the strategic plan, and how long should it be? So do you mean that, so I guess I would ask is whether or not you mean the strategic planning process or the plan. If what you mean is the strategic plan, like the plan manager role that I talked about, how many FTEs? I'd say a portion of one, right? As a staff of 10, I think you wear multiple hats. And it's a good question to bring out. I don't mean that a plan manager, as I describe it, that necessarily to every organization, that will be the full job of an individual, just being a plan manager. Some places it could be. Smaller organizations, it's going to be the responsibility of somebody commingled with other responsibilities. if you're asking me how long it should take to write a strategic plan, in most of my, so it varies a lot by organization. I've worked with organizations to craft a strategic plan in as few as 4 months, as few as 3 months, I think, actually, and for a few of them. And I have worked with organizations who want to do a much more sort of deliberative, multi sort of factor process, and those can take as long as 12 months. For people who say that the strategic planning process is too complicated, when it needs a SWOT analysis, roadmaps, etc. Yeah, I think that can be a more nimble process. Yeah. So John, thank you for the question. I think it's really important. You can do it in a way that's somewhat more nimble. I think there's some things you need to do. I think you need to talk to your stakeholders. You need to involve some people in the process. You need to hear from your major board members, your major staff members, and I think often your major donors or supporters in the community. I think there's only so much you can do to shortchange that. But can you do it in a way that's more nimble and more effective? I think you can. I actually think one of the keys, though, to strategic planning being nimble is in that annual evaluation process and in taking a moment each year to breathe and think about it. That does not require that you restart the whole process and do it again, but it does give you an opportunity to reflect on any significant changes in your environment, any significant changes in your organizational leadership, make sure that they're reflected in the strategic plan still, make adjustments at that point as you need to, and then keep going forward. And I honestly think that that's where the nimbleness can really come into play, is by setting up that evaluation process. So I hope that answers those questions. I'm just going to take a minute to look at the chat and see if there's any more there. I think that when you think, looks like there's a question here about making sure that best practices are, what are the best practices for making sure that the strategic plan is aligned with the organization's annual plans. I think in many ways, the plan manager can serve that function for you. I think making sure that you have a formal process for review, not only of the strategic plan, but also of its alignment with the operational plans and for establishing those operational plans. Making sure that it remains a primary reference over the course of the year even. So, in my time working at nonprofits, for example, there might be really unique and compelling opportunities that will pop up halfway through the fiscal year. As a leadership team, we'd have a conversation about whether or not we want to take advantage of that. I think at that point, a plan manager, the leader of the organization, hopefully folks across the organization, take a moment to reflect on whether or not that opportunity advances that vision statement and your organization's goals. Seeing that kind of alignment can really make sure that your operational plans don't diverge significantly from the strategic plan. All right, I'm going to take a minute and look at the Q&A and see if there's anything else. I think that's great. Well, I want to say thank you all so much for this today. I really appreciate your joining me for this conversation and for your questions. I say this really sincerely. If you all have questions that I didn't get a chance to answer that you wanted me to, you all are welcome to send me an email. You're also welcome to share your feedback on today's webinar. You can look at the QR code and share it. And, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for all of your feedback and your great questions. I hope this was useful to you all, and I hope that you all have a great strategic planning experience and that it helps your organization so much.